we provide a lot of content here at Cerius. Sometimes we wonder, are we a talent company or ourselves a marketing company? And somehow we make them both work. Given the rate of change and the talent-driven nature of the workforce of the future, we have seen an increased trend where companies are really needing to level up their human capital capabilities. We are having these types of conversations with business owners and CEOs at a rate that we have never seen before. It's resulting in HR being one of the fastest growing areas of a company and needing to stay up to date on the latest changes, the latest trends, and the various perspectives, because when you are a fractional interim or sitting HR, you only get the perspective of one company. So it is fantastic to get into forums like this and get perspectives that we normally wouldn't have or know what questions to ask to bring that information out. So we have some incredible experienced HR leaders on this call, some who probably could speak to and present on this topic. What we want to do is give some additional information and frameworks based on our panelist backgrounds that may help you gain a knowledge understanding or some tools on how do we take this more into our organization? How do we get our leadership teams on board? Sometimes it's really tough to be the driver and the captain of these discussions. I think our panelists are going to provide some great tools on that. Because this month we're exploring mental health in the workplace, conversations, compliance, costs with Eileen and Darren. Eileen Dewar, I'm just so excited. You've been in human resources for well over 25 years. You're currently with Engage PEO, which means you've got that unique perspective working with tens, if not hundreds of companies and advising them through how to manage mental health in the workplace. I've been in a couple of CEO discussions recently where the CEO said, this happened. I didn't know what to do. And if we wait until it gets to that point, there's some challenges with that. And Darren Chapetta, global employment attorney, you've dealt with you've worked through and shepherd human relations and HR compliance for years in a number of different industries. And I don't know that there's anyone more passionate about taking care of the employees who take care of our business. And it comes across in everything you do. I encourage everyone to please connect directly with Darren and Eileen. Their LinkedIn profiles are in our chat. You can learn more about their background and connect with them separately. So with that, I'm going to get this kicked off. This is not a topic that I don't know we would have done it 5 years ago, but it has become part of everything that we do, and we're talking about in HR circles and with leadership teams. Eileen, I want to start off with you. Is this coming from external drivers, internal awareness? Why is this such not just a hot topic, a necessary topic right now?
Ultimately, I think that the pandemic is what brought this to the forefront. When we were doing our practice session, we really came to the conclusion, the three of us, Kristen and Darren and I, that if we were to do this seminar before the pandemic, it would be a completely different conversation. But as all of us were put into extreme situations, it was a little different for each one of us going through the pandemic, the lockdowns, either being, in my case, I was like fully isolated by myself with 3 cats for 8 weeks. And then other people were locked in with people that they don't necessarily want to be with, or found in the course of 8+ weeks that they didn't want to be with, and created a lot of stress. And then the working from home, that was new for a lot of people. The trying to educate their kids at home, that was new. And what it did to families, some people say it was great family time, but other people said that, oh, wow, it was way too much family time and there was just too much tension and stress. So during that time, things really became, employers as well as employees became aware of mental health. And I think that the big way that we think about mental health really changed during the pandemic is that prior to the pandemic, I think most of us thought that people fall into the camp of either we're mentally healthy or we're mentally ill, right? Is that we saw mental health as a very black and white polar type of thing. Whereas during the pandemic and the stress that we were all put under is that we have now, I think, come to a realization that mental health is a continuum, that, some days I'm more mentally healthy than other days, and that all of us are on that continuum. And, some of us might be in the more mentally healthy category most of the time, but certain stressors, whether it be the pandemic, financial issues, family issues, deaths, relationships, can suddenly find ourselves on the less mentally well scale. And so that awareness, is starting to really bleed into corporations, and it's funny because I did a presentation a couple of years on stress in the workplace with Dale Carnegie, and we did a lot of the same kind of conversation. But that awareness was still 2 years ago in 2022, just becoming aware, because I did a little research a couple of days ago on where we are now, and I found a study that showed that benefit leaders now, well, in 2022, 36% of them thought that employees were concerned about mental health. Whereas in 2023, a year ago, that number moved to 94%. So, yeah, the awareness culturally is so much greater about mental health issues and that they affect all of us as opposed to a small class. It's really changed, and I think it's continuing to change even more and more.
I mean, Darren, what do you see? Because you've worked through this for decades, where you were the one who got that first phone call. You've worked for some large companies, you've had quite the diverse workforce, and you got the phone call when something was on fire. I'm curious as to your view on the shift in either the relevance and the forefront of the conversation, or just the depth of the conversation we're having now.
You're right. I mean, it's going back to kind of to your point, being the person on call 24 hours a day, 365 for a certain theme park that never closes except when there's hurricanes in Florida. You're right. You're going to get those situations. You're going to get those calls about somebody making a comment that they, potentially want to kill themselves or things like that. It almost was a little pocket, to your point, where it kind of resulted in those fit for duties. So 10 years ago, it was not very prevalent in the workforce. It was very situational. It was very incident based. And it was pretty severe when it kind of rose to the company. I love, to Alien's point, like we all got through the pandemic, and I think we like got through it, and then it was like latent PTSD. Not that I'm a doctor, but it's like little things afterward would trigger you, and you'd be like, how in the world did we get through it? So I think what's going on now is the awareness piece. And you're right. It's like every day, it's almost like you find yourself somewhere on the spectrum. But I also like to look at it vertically, like a layer. You're like, okay, we got through the pandemic. This is great. And then there was like monkeypox. Okay, I think we got through that. That's great. And then it was like return to work. And that was kind of a little stressful. And then it was all the things that are layered on top of it, right? And you look at the stressors that are going on right now. It's an election year. The economy is a little bit crazy. Lots of layoffs. It could be a situation too where families are disagreeing about politics. That could be stressful. So when we start to layer these things on top, and I think a lot of folks finally understood. I never want to say the benefit to the pandemic, so I don't want to use that word. If there was one thing out of the pandemic that I think possibly could be a silver lining, is a lot of folks truly understood what balance felt like, and they found balance in their lives. And I think because of that, finding the balance and then going back into a work situation, they're way more aware about a feeling that they're having, and now they're able to tag it more towards, this is stress. This is something that's not, it just understanding how they were feeling beforehand was like, well, this is corporate America. This is kind of what happens, right? The pandemic was a bit of a reset as far as values and what we're feeling and what's important to us. And I think that is guiding a bit of the awareness. And there's a lot of crazy going on in the world, right? I did not look at the news this morning because I can't. Every day I wake up and turn it on, and there's something else that I get angst over, and I have zero control over it. So you're right. I think it was a very compartmentalized conversation 10 years ago. I think in some respect, everyone probably has something that's going on right now. And to your point, Aileen, it's either like today is a good day, today is a really rough day, based on any one of these situational stressors, which may not be work-based, but sometimes they bleed into the workplace as well, right?
Or the workplace is causing even more, and that's the trigger. How are we bringing, as HR leaders, and I think that HR needs to be the driver in just about anything that is going on in an organization that has people in it, how are we bringing this conversation into the workplace? Because it used to be there's home life, and if there's something going on with you, you shove that thing down or you keep it at home. That's not the case anymore. So from both each of your perspectives, what are the strategies for bringing those conversations and normalizing it in the workplace?
I would want to say that the causes, of the stress that Kristen was just talking about, sometimes it's personal, sometimes it's the workforce. I think that this is another thing the pandemic did, is that separation of work from home doesn't exist anymore, right? Is that I can remember, we all rewind 20 years ago before we all had walked around with cell phones, is that, like I was on jobs that I wasn't allowed to have personal calls because they knew it came through the receptionist and you couldn't have personal calls. Well, now we, all walk around with these devices that good luck trying to keep people off of their personal calls or texts or whatever, right? But it became, that blend of work and home became all one. And coming out of the pandemic, even with now we saw Amazon, right, is making everybody come back to the office the first year. And there's more and more organizations that people are being required to work in the office full time. But this idea that we're going to separate our personal life and we just don't talk about this when we're at work is not, a reality anymore. So, the conversations, this is one of the big gap areas. When I did the presentation 2 years ago with Dale Carnegie, what we found is in doing our homework then on how are people addressing mental health, is the number one thing they were doing is getting EAPs, employee assistance programs. And those are fantastic resources. They offer free counseling, they come out in trauma situations, and you can get some financial advice, some legal advice for personal problems, referrals to like long-term care facilities for grandma if she suddenly needs to go into one, those kinds of things. But it's just like, okay, you got a personal problem, my employee, here's a phone number, please go deal with that on your own, right? But what we found in doing our research is the big gap was managers talking to people about their health, and not just their physical health, but their mental health and their well-being, and how they're doing in their lives, not just in their work performance, but how is your family life, at home, and helping them to find some sort of resolution, whether that just be an ear or it be connecting them to resources. That is the opportunity for most employers. And a lot of the more current research is showing that more and more organizations are recognizing this, and that the big gap now is training managers on how to really be people and talk to their people, as opposed to just being, a metric measurer.
I've said this before. I think as HR leaders now, one of the biggest principles that we have to lean in on is courage. Because when you listen to the employees, they're going to tell you how they feel. I don't know if everybody follows, the Amazon story about the percentage of employees who are not happy about it, the percentage of employees who are, claim they'll be looking for new jobs, right? So clearly, it's not something that landed well with the employees. Arguably, you could say it's kind of like a voluntary separation package, so to speak, where people will choose out. There's some obviously ideas as to why they're doing it. But as HR leaders, it's really tough for us right now because we are hearing from employees how they feel about whether it is return to work or whatever is going on, right? And your upper level leadership might not subscribe to that. And there's a disconnect between what the CEO wants versus what the employees want, and that's a tough spot as an HR leader to kind of bridge that gap and try to be that advocate. It's very difficult. Add on top of that, because everything's always layered, right? It's always kind of structured and complex, is you've got Gen Z, you've got millennials coming to the workplace where they don't really understand why you wouldn't talk about what's going on in the world. In fact, company, I need a point of view. I need a point of view on this right now and today. Right? Look at what's going on college campuses when it comes to Palestine and Israel and things like that. That is the group that is graduating and coming and being interns and coming into the company. And they want a point of view. They want the company to take a stand. They want to hear from it, right? So then your HR there going, okay, we have a lot of folks that are, concerned about whatever it is, X, Y, and Z. And you really have to, you have to be aware enough to listen what are people saying? Do I need to take action on that? Because what you don't want is to be like oh, I can't remember 100%, but like a Columbia or whatever that, in some respects looked like they were not protecting one specific protected class versus another. So there's so much for us to do these days as HR leaders. I mean, you are just kind of referee, you are problem solvers, you are the crystal ball person of what happens in the future. You're looking at a lot of different things, but I think it's really important to chip away at getting the senior leaders to understand that this wellness is a journey thing, right? Because to your point, managers don't know how to have conversations, right? But if they don't see that the CEO or upper leadership sees value in it, they're not going to want to have the conversations. And so I think that's where there's also an importance of making sure that tone at the top is, hey guys, we really should be talking about this. And then you can get the specifics of how do you do it, right? Because it is a little bit of a minefield.
I want to chip on something you hit on right there. And Eileen, I'm curious too. He just mentioned well-being.
Mhm.
It's not focusing solely on mental health, but let's take the proactive of let's keep you healthy. Let's find healthy ways to be able to address it. And what role HR can play in that. I know you do a number of trainings, seminars, counseling, advising on how to have those conversations, because we want to be able to give them their voice, and talking can be therapeutic, but it can also go 10 different ways real quick. How are you advising HR leaders to allow there to be voices, to allow there to have a safe place in the workplace to talk about it, while still respecting everyone's political, religion, any number of those things? They want to talk about it and have that courage to be able to ask those tough questions of those around you to, how are you feeling about this?
This is a really challenging area. It's like going from being just a manager to a social work caseworker, right? Is being able to know where to go and where to stop, and know what the resources are that are available. And that's one of the things that we were talking about when we were prepping for this session, is like some of these resources that managers may not necessarily know about, is that when or recognize using is, we do, almost every organization does have an employee assistance program, but how many people have ever really called it? Have you, if you have direct reports, have you called the EAP and tried to use it yourself? Because knowing, right, how to use something is a lot easier to explain it. And you can, even if you have an employee that has an issue that they're very upset, and you can see that they come in the office, it's time for your one-on-one, and you ask them, I can see you're different today, your mood, are you okay, what's going on? And they say, oh my God, my grandmother fell down the stairs and she's been in the emergency room, and now I have to put her in a long-term care facility and I don't know what to do, and you're like, oh, what do I do, right? As a manager, is you can get on the EAP with them, right? Help them dial on the phone and be like, yeah, there's some resources, and showing that you care, right, about that employee and how to do it, sort of thing. Right away. There's also someone that's having, some sort of breakdown of some sort, right? I mean, it definitely happens in the workplace that somebody has a panic attack at some point. They're very depressed about something. Is most health insurance that we provide to our employees has a teledoc option, or virtual care option. And have you used it yourself? Have you tried to figure that out? And sitting with that employee, because I can't be someone's psychologist, right? I am not qualified to do that, but I can connect them in this world right now with a resource. One of the things that Darren mentioned is like the last thing we want to do is send them home. Do not send a depressed person home by themselves, right? We might want to remove them from the employee population, put them in a private room, keep another person with them, don't leave them alone at all, but we want to get them help right away. And, in emergency situations, because they do happen, is always remember that there is 211 that you can call it, like 911 for mental health. and they have all sorts of resources. If the person doesn't have insurance, for instance, that can connect you right away. You can be on the phone with the employee sitting there and get them help, right away.
Darren, I'm curious, let's dig into that a little bit. We talked about managers. What do you do? We're not, as HR leaders, we're not caseworkers, and we're not psychologists. We're not even trained therapists. Neither are the managers. There's almost a training there, like first aid for a manager. And it really is, you mentioned the word triage, and I think, oh, we're teaching our managers just mental first aid. I mean, we teach them nutrition, we take physical, first aid. What about the mental first aid? And I appreciate it, Aileen, you started to hit on, what would that look like? Like step one, step two, step three. What are the basics? Because we can't teach people to care and be authentic when that's just not who they are. But we can teach them step 1, 2, 3. Here is your mental first aid.
You can't teach someone to be authentic, right? Which is always tough. And I wish I could teach empathy. I had a conversation with somebody like probably a year ago that the same. I was like, I wish I could teach you empathy because it just was very linear in nature, right? And so I think understanding who you are as a leader, as a manager, what your style is very helpful, right? Because if you're like, listen, I'm not that warm and fuzzy. I don't know what to do when someone comes to me and tell me this. That's great. Let us know that, because as as we look to put someone through like a boot camp, and put your managers through like a quick little triage boot camp, like, hey, don't shy away from these conversations, because a couple different things have happened too, potentially over their life as a leader. Sometimes a mentor or a more senior leader will say, hey, don't get involved in those conversations. Just, to Eileen's point, give them EAP or just go to HR. That's not really the best way to be, right? So you always want to, I think step one is assume good intent, okay? Person's coming to you, or you've noticed that there's a difference in them, and you just want to be like, hey, listen, over the past couple of days, you have not been yourself. Is everything okay? You certainly can. I always do, but that's because of my background, is I add a disclaimer like, hey, listen, if there's something you don't need to share with me, hey, personal details that you don't, personal, medical, whatever. I just noticed a shift in you, and I want to make sure that you're okay. Is everything okay? And sometimes they'll just tell you everything, as all of us have probably experienced for at some point. You're like, I didn't need to know that, but thank you for sharing. And they're just going to share something with you. So if you assume good intent, know your limitations, ask just generally, but let them know I don't need to share too much. But then be very careful about offering advice. What I love, I was reading something recently and I can't remember it, but basically, one of the traits I think that make people really enjoy working for leaders is when they see that leader is human and vulnerable. And so if that leader can be like, hey, listen, I've been through things like that myself, I understand it, without divulging too much of their private, lives and things like that. I think if there's a moment where you can connect through a vulnerability, that's going to absolutely make the employee feel like, wow, this was a great conversation. I feel heard, right? And then if you know what resources, probably are the best ones, then you're certainly welcome to do that. But you're also welcome to say, hey, listen, we've got great resources as a company. Some resources, to be honest with you, I can't remember all of them. I just want to just look at a couple of things. Let me get back with you about some things that possibly we can offer for you. And then they can maybe jump and, call HR. I was a former Netflixer, and we use the term informed captain, or it's a conversation where is everything okay? And this was like my second day at a company where someone was like, can you call this employee? And the employee basically was suffering from postpartum depression. And it said, maybe it's just better if I kill my kids. You can never be trained to have a conversation with somebody about, hey, I understand that you're going through a tough time and that you may have made a comment regarding your children. Yeah. And so you want to find out who's your informed captain that can handle those conversations if that comes out. Don't have a reaction to it. Don't have an attention peak. Don't do the, oh my God, nothing like that. Don't pass judgment. I think leaders should be taught to intake is the best thing that I can say. Intake in an empathetic, open-ended, listening, mentioning, hey, thanks for sharing. Let me get back with you. I want to chat and see what kind of resources we have that could assist you with X, Y, and Z. I mean, that's in a nutshell, that's the steps that I would probably look at.
And then they turn around and call HR and if there is an HR, and we understand some companies, there just isn't anyone in HR. So who is that informed captain? Who is the lead? Or we've got any number of fractional HR individuals. We may not be there 2 days a week. We may not be able to be on call when that happens. So when we're not there as I love that term. Who's the informed captain when we're not there? And there's a range from what we could do versus what we should do versus what we have to do, that compliance piece. And I know, Eileen, that's a big space that you're in right now as to what are the legal requirements, because those, you don't need to sell those into the leadership team. And then there's the conversation on here's what you should do and the impact it can have to your annual renewals, your insurance costs. I'm sure there's any number of those. Arm us with a little bit of background or information on, we don't need to sell what we have to do on compliance, but what should we do and what can we do in the, what's in it for me for leadership or business owners?
The legal, requirement is the general duty clause, right? That organizations are required to create a safe workplace for people, and that's also, keeping in mind that if you have one person that's kind of going off the rails, that you have to protect all the others too. So, there's a lot of pieces to that. And of course, I can't dive into all of that because we could spend hours just talking about what it is to create a safe workplace. But in terms of the costs of organizations, I did a little bit, more of research, and I can tell you, like, for instance, the average healthcare cost of a person that suffers from major depression for just the depression is $10,000 a year, and that's going on to the medical claims, right, which drives the renewal. And depending upon the size of your organization, and that's just depression. We're not talking about, there's so many other mental health conditions that stack up on those prescriptions. And then when you have depression, for instance, is that can cause all sorts of other physical ailments that people start taking on from the depression because they don't necessarily get out and exercise, so they gain weight, right? And then we know obesity causes so much trouble, in terms of healthcare and medicine. So that's a big, issue. And then there's also lost productivity. The number of sick days that someone takes, because of depression is substantial. In addition to even presenteeism, I saw one study that the average person that just suffers from depression is missing, even though they're physically present at work, is they're missing 32 days worth of work a year because they're too depressed to focus on their job, right? So finding ways to support those folks so that you can be as healthy as possible and well and mentally alert is, that's where, this is what we should do, right? Is addressing those kinds of things. And so some people, say, for instance, are suffering from depression, and there's so much stigma still today about seeing a psychologist or a psychiatrist. They're just living that way and don't even realize that they could go get help, and whether that be psychological therapy that would solve their issues, and get them into better spirits, or it be medication that the person needs, whether it's temporary or permanent. These things are going to, if we can help them find that care, find out that it's okay to find that care, let alone connect them with the resources for that care, it drives down, the cost of medical insurance, because a problem solved is a lot better than stacking comorbidities, when it comes to healthcare drivers. But then also that focus, right? That presenteeism of being actually able to work on the job, and not to mention the ripple effect of all the people around them. There was a great commercial, I don't know, it was maybe 6 or 7 years ago, for a medication called Abilify that I'll just never forget, because on that little commercial, there's these little dots. Okay, they're like dot people, little circles that have little eyes and smiley faces. And the one little dot person has an anxiety disorder and starts like shaking, and then the other little dot people get nervous, and they, like, you can see them all as a group pull away from the little shaking dot person, and that's what mental illness is right? When it's untreated, people get scared of the person that's acting different and they pull away. So there's an impact on all of those people. But if we can get that person back to calm stasis, right, then the other people come together, and that productivity and that teamwork starts happening again. So that's the case for why we should do it, is overall productivity as well as that individual.
What are you seeing as some innovative ways to is I think that you can get a two for one. Let's take away the stigma of it. And how do we be proactive? Because those legal compliance things are what to do when something happens. That's a reactive, that's an after the fact. That snowball is down the hill, it's wrecked into the village, and we can't do anything about it. But I know that we can be proactive. What are some things that you're seeing companies do and HR leaders bring it to the forefront? At school, they're bringing in the middle schools. I mean, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they're the awareness, that mental awareness, I can't wait for them to really get in and drive this. They're putting relaxation lounges in the schools where kids can just go, and especially if someone seems like they got a bad grade and someone suggests, why don't you go to the relaxation lounge for your next period? Why don't you go at recess? And that relaxation lounge, they're not saying we think that you need to go take a time out in the mental health booth over there. What are you seeing in the workplace as some really good implementations and ways to, you're not just taking the stigma out, but you're saying, let's go through this app. Let's start looking. Let's go shopping therapists. This is great.
I mean, a couple things that I've seen recently, and what I love about this is reframing it to wellness, well-being, as opposed to mental health. And I know we can't underscore that enough because mental health has such a stigma to it, even after the pandemic. We all understand what it means. I think, but when someone uses the term mental health, I think it goes to a different location as opposed to a wellness or well-being. I forget, it was a company recently that was talking about, listen, we've got well-being days and we offer well-being days. And maybe it was 2 a month. I can't quite remember. Maybe it wasn't that much, but it was basically no questions asked. An employee can be like, you know what? I need a well-being day. Absolutely. Go ahead and take it, do your thing. Right. And what I love about that, as long as there's not, over abuse, which I'm sure there wouldn't be, but if there is, you pull that back, is that there's no questions asked. When you start to show people you're having a moment, it's okay. Have your moment. Do what you need to do and then come back to us, right? We're not going to ask questions and things like that. I think that is, if you can build your culture around, again, coming from a Netflix example that I love, which is the freedom and responsibility. You have the freedom to tell us, guys, I need a day today, but you're responsible to making sure that you get your stuff done and things like that. But we totally get it. I love, and he's probably sleeping down here somewhere, because I have a golden retriever, and I love the service dogs. I love the animals popping into the work locations, right? Because that lowers your stress level. There's those creative things. I love to your point, there was, oh gosh, not a quiet room. A lot of offices have open concept, it's like the new thing, right? Which is very difficult for me in my job because things I say no one should ever hear. So I have to go into a closet. But if you're in an open environment, but you're neurodivergent, or you're just something going on with you, or you need a place where you need to concentrate. I know we're kind of delving more in the accommodation piece, and a lot of the stuff interweaves with an accommodation, right? Versus the should, versus you kind of have to, depending on how it's brought forward to you by the employee. But I love the fact that they have built spaces understanding that open concept doesn't work for everyone. So if you're telling folks, hey, like Amazon, you got to come back to work 5 days a week. Okay, I'm not going to be productive. I'm afraid to say something, but they now have a space over there where I can actually get stuff done because there's white noise and there's whatever it is, right? And so things like that I think are taking a very practical approach of what are people saying are barriers for them to feel like themselves and get things done at work. I think is very helpful. Again, listening, being aware, gathering information, but also saying, listen, you said we listened, and actually putting things in place. There's a million things. Those are the things that's on top of my head come to mind that I've seen lately.
Thinking back, before the pandemic, a lot of large organizations on self-insured plans, it wasn't uncommon for them to implement wellness programs and disease management programs, right? Where if you prove things like losing a certain amount of weight, or, how much exercise, like taking steps on your app, your Apple Watch or Fitbit, as well as cessation of smoking, people would get lower cost premiums, right, for their medical insurance, and all sorts of teamwork came around this, right? Of like, let's have the fitness challenge, how many steps we're going to each do a day, and we're going to, battle this all out. Well, this same kind of mindset can be transferred to well-being, right? Wellness as in a psychological wellness, in addition to physical. Let's face it, that they are tied, physical and mental, they blend together. Yeah, in addition to things like the wellness day, right? That's nice, that can be done. But you can also, there are so many apps now, right, that organizations can pay for, subscribe for programs to have things that employees have resources for like meditations. If your business, a lot of businesses are still virtual, 100%. Some are hybrid. Some are, going back to complete return to office. So, you have to position it yourself. And if you're like 100% return to office, and depending upon the size and the space, you can have things like half-hour yoga class or half-hour meditation led by somebody to help people that want to opt in. Never want to force these things on people, but they want to opt in, to those types of programs. A lot of organizations, it's not uncommon for them to reimburse for programs, for fitness studios and so forth. But it would be equally valid to, reimburse for things like a wellness app, or just provide that, tool to people. It's another thing you got to teach people to use the tool, by the way. Like, you can't just say, oh, we have an app for that, go log on to the store, right? And it's like, let's do a sit in the office and everybody look at the same screen, and let's go through the app together and look at all these features and how they could work and get people talking about it. And one of the big things is support groups, is being able to facilitate whatever types of support groups might be relevant for your population. It's different for every company. Some, would benefit from groups like Weight Watchers, for instance, having that ability to have a meeting on site, for instance, for employees that want to opt in. Others, there might be a reason for a grief support group, especially based on the size of your organization, for folks that are dealing with situations like that, because we all lose loved ones at one point or another, even though when there are pets. Management being supportive of these types and just offering them, even when not so many people take advantage of them, it creates a safe place, right? People that even don't take advantage of the programs, suddenly the anxiety level goes down, that I'm not perfect. It's okay, I'm not perfect. As long as, I'm a good, nice employee and I perform as best as I can, it's okay to not be perfect. We want to create that, safe place for people.
You've hit on a few things there, and Mary put a comment in the chat, and right, this is why we are sometimes share a brain. You had mentioned, how about mental wellness of the HR leader as a CEO, CO advocate? HR leaders are gaining this burnout at an all-time high because it all comes onto our shoulders. And I had written down, what about the owner, CEO, and leadership team? Because we talk a lot about how do we support them? How do we get out there? And we look amongst ourselves, and anything is just going to trigger us at this point, because we've got, whether imposter syndrome, the risk that we're taking, everyone else's challenges, we're shouldering them. We're no longer just responsible for our employees at work. We're responsible for their home lives as well. That's come up recently in CEO conversations. How do we do check-ins on each other and really support that HR leader, whether within the community or amongst the leadership, and maybe set the example?
That's a lot, Mary. It's really true. I mean, I personally, think that a lot of it is having support groups. I mean, that's one of the advantages for HR people of being part of either, say, PIRA or SHRM or NHRA, is that being actively involved in one of those associations is that like, I have been able to have mentors over the years, and I'm able to take problems from the workplace to somebody else, right, and get advice from them and get support, so that it's almost like going to a therapist, specifically for my HR problems with my clients and their employees and so forth. And having that support, that I'm not that sometimes, especially the HR department of one, there's a lot of businesses that is just one HR person, and we are the company keeper of secrets, that person feels very isolated, and they're like full, of all these problems with the people in the organization. So having, somebody outside, that, you can vent some of that on and get some valid feedback, right, is very, very helpful. But I think that this is one of the areas that HR and executive leadership can really be support groups for each other, right? Is that if they can have that, some of the best organizations are organizations where the CEO and the HR leader are like best buds in terms of business, right? That the HR person can come with most of the resources, right? And the CEO has these challenges, but also has the strategic, big picture vision of the company, and they can come together and support one another, because the CEO needs a trusted partner to release all of this fear, this angst, the pain that they're collecting from their collective employees, and have a place to put that is safe and confidential, and have a good guide on what to do and what not to do in the workplace, and what programs might be beneficial, what programs won't be beneficial. Having that collaboration between the two of them can help both of them be much more successful. So, that's what, as HR, we're like really striving for. But as HR people, we have to know our stuff to gain the trust of that CEO, as we really need to know what we're doing and do our homework before we start talking to him or her about these things.
And as HR, we hold the world on our shoulders sometimes. And we've gotten so used to that we don't think it's a problem, right? Like you just there's so much on our plates that it becomes normalized. And so I think what's going to be helpful is to actually just have conversations about, you don't need, yes, you can handle lots of pain. You don't need to handle that much pain. I mean, my background is, employment litigator, employment lawyer, employee relations, HR compliance. All I ever deal with is issues, right? And I never realized how that affects you over time, because you're just so used to it. That's my job. I deal with stressful stuff. I have to deal with conflict all the time. I deal with people who are having issues. And until like I sat down and like read an article like, this is the 7 signs of burnout, I'm like, holy cow, I have burnout. Like I wasn't looking at it that way because I am used to holding the world on my shoulders. I think we have to have an honest conversation with ourselves and say, guys, we have a lot of work that we're doing. Everyone's experiencing a lot of pain. We all have a high pain tolerance, but we don't want you to get to a point where you're burnt out. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about, divvy up work. Let's talk about wellness days. I mean, it's really tough. And as HR, obviously, right, we've been through such interesting things over the past few years. And it's almost like it keeps on coming. Like I joke around, I'm like, if tomorrow there's an alien invasion, I'd be like, yep, seems about right. Like there's just nothing that shocks us anymore. But we have to honor ourselves. We have to be true to the fact of how we're feeling. There's no shame in saying, I have high anxiety right now, and I need to admit it, because stress leave is a real thing, especially in certain states, right? 50.1% of your stress is work related. It's a work related situation. And I think a lot of times in this world of, well, there's a lot of rifts, there's a lot of layoffs. Let me just be the good trooper because I don't want to be the person that's viewed as problematic. I could be in the chopping block. I think that's part of the reason why some folks don't come forward, is because they're looking at the restructuring and kind of the work environment. They're looking at the job market, which is in and of itself a soul destroying, really difficult situation. And so that adds stress to people. I'm in a job, I'm burnt out, I don't want to be here. This is terrible for my mental health. But I can't leave. And I look at LinkedIn every day. There's some really, really awesome quotes that are very, very, very helpful and uplifting. But the advice I've seen is like, hey, your mental health is more important than that job. You're absolutely right. But until you've been in the job market look and see what's going on there, I don't know if I would take that advice, because you could go from one to another and they're both very triggering. So it's difficult right now for anyone, including HR, to admit that they're maybe in a place where they're having a challenge. So I think we also have to honor that. We want to make sure we make it as, and I'll put it in air quotes, safe as possible to come forward. We have to make sure that obviously if it's work related, we look at it from an accommodation perspective, which is different in some respects than just, other components of wellness. But there's a lot. And I think that's why, the whole the whole analogy of, we need to put our oxygen mask on first before we help others in HR. We're not built that way sometimes. We're built to help others and jump into action. But if there's constant reassurance and discussion about it's okay to take time as HR, it's okay to come forward and tell me you're burnt out. It all comes from company culture, trust, all those things, right? That create a safe environment to come forward and be honest about how you're feeling.
Dina put into the comments, executive coaching could be helpful to HR and CEO too. And we are seeing coaching at all levels at an all-time high. It is absolutely up there. And someone recently said it was at a conference in a breakout room, and they said the only difference between a coach and a therapist is the coach makes a lot more. Coaching is such a proactive, non-defensive thing of let's bring someone in to develop, because no one feels more supported than when the company is investing in developing them. And whether that's at the leadership level, management level, I'm seeing more and more coaches being brought in to facilitate teams and discussions and to start pull things apart and identify who are the people that maybe we need to have some additional conversations because they're stuck, they're caught. I love that. And Charlene mentioned that for the last few years, I have integrated the manager's role in mental well-being in all leadership development programs she designs for clients, which that goes to Ed's comment of, I teach at the executive and leadership level at colleges, and there are no programs on how to take this on, how to deal with this. So in our leadership training, it's a great way to integrate it in or to what we're teaching and normalizing it in the conversation. Thank you so much, Charlene and Ed and Mary for those comments. One thing I want to hit on is, Eileen, you have this knowledge that many of us don't have any insights into, and that is, as we're going into benefit renewals, we're talking to our brokers or we're looking at the list of services, what should we be asking for? What should we be making sure is included? What is the list of services or that menu in addition to the EAP, or maybe other sources within our communities that we could tap into?
Wow. Well, there's, a lot of options. I mean, definitely, I think almost all organizations now do have an EAP, which is a good thing. But I would definitely make sure that the plans have virtual care, right? For not for mental health, for psychological support is these days, I mean, finding an in-person person, some people have the time and the bandwidth, and there's definitely value to that. But more and more, I think people are taking advantage of virtual and are willing to take more advantage of virtual, right? It might even be a first step before they get to the physical in-person. I think when looking at health plans, it's really important to look at these days rehabilitation programs. I mean, we haven't talked about drug addiction and alcoholism in this conversation at all today. But, the reality is that we're in a fentanyl crisis in the United States. I mean, that we hear it on the news like every day, let alone, alcohol problems have been prevalent in our society, for centuries. So making sure not all medical insurance covers that, especially when we go into more self-funded plans, and making sure that that coverage is available for people and for their dependents. One of the things when I was doing some research that I noticed is that I saw a study that 33% of employees are concerned about their kids' anxiety level, and then like 25% are, severely concerned, about their children's mental health. Especially if you have adolescents at home, things happen with them with experimenting with drugs and alcohol. So having that available, but making sure that those benefits, for whether it be substance abuse or for mental health, extend to the dependents as well, and that there's enough coverage. That's one of the issues, with modern day insurance, is that it's capped a lot of the times, and so you want to make sure that it's a reasonable amount for the folks. So those are a couple off the top of my head. Do you have any additional ideas, Darren?
I always get stuck around the EAP conversation, right? Because I love and you're right, there's a lot of unused benefits that any company has. Like if I look back at probably my past couple jobs, I'm like, yeah, no, I didn't know I forgot we had that. Like I just, when you enroll that you have these things, but you forget about it, which is unfortunate. There's also a lot of stigma attached, misunderstanding regarding EAP. In kind of my role as an employee relations leader, um, it's a wonderful resource. We all know that, right? We know that there's these great resources. They're virtual now. They can really help you. They can get you in a good mindset. They can give you tips and tricks to kind of get through whatever you're getting through, or they can help refer you to somebody, that's more local. But employees still think the company finds out what you said. They still think that it's not confidential. They still think, why in the world would I tell, somebody that my employer is paying for, that my employer is causing me stress? I'm not, and there's that misunderstanding of how that information is conveyed and what the company gets to know, which is essentially nothing, unless it's a whole fit for duty thing, but that's a very, very, very specialized, weird situation, right? And so any chance we can get, and you kind of mentioned it too, Eileen, like, let's just show them what the teledoc thing looks like. If you could actually show people, here's what it looks like, here's the app. If you're a leader, and maybe in your staff meeting, you could be like, hey guys, you know what? We're gonna do something different today. We're gonna spend 10 minutes and we're gonna go through like some of these benefits that I actually forgot we had. Let's go talk about it. And if you kind of go through that conversation, you'll probably have one person in the staff meeting going, I actually used that, it was really great. Or, let HR know, like, hey, by the way, we're going to call EAP. It's not a real thing, but we want to make sure that we walk through it. Great. We'll just let the EAP provider know that they're going to call it, not a problem. And then everyone can see it, and it helps to like demystify it a little bit. But you also have to have those points of like, hey, please remember this is confidential. The company doesn't find out. I think that's where, as companies, if we're going to put these really cool, and we should think out of the box, these really great benefits offerings, we got to make sure we talk about it throughout the year, not just open enrollment. And I'm the type of guy like, show me, because I won't remember. Like, show me show me what to do. I'd like to see us actually take the offerings that we currently have and just utilize them, because most folks don't. And I think it's a missed opportunity that a lot of companies have, right?
Yeah, and some other benefits that employers have started adding that I'm thinking of is things like childcare. Childcare has been such a problem post-pandemic, is that there were so many, most of our childcare in America was provided by women in their homes, right? That they would set up a home daycare and have 5 or 6 kids, depending upon the licensing requirements, right? And when the pandemic happened and everybody was sent home, then there were no kids for those folks to be able to provide care to. So those ladies had to go find other sources of employment and income. And we have found post-pandemic, most of those women never returned to having home daycares. And now there is a tremendous shortage of daycare in America. So ways that employers can really help employees is providing childcare. We had a big movement of that before the pandemic, when more companies were on site, of having on-site daycares in large workplaces, and thinking about that, because this is one of the biggest stresses, especially if you want to return your employees to the office. Where are their kids going to go? Is they need that help. There are also services that I've seen employers subscribe to, that they can pay for babysitters when employees' kids are sick, because that's a whole nother issue. As my child got sick today, I'm well, I could come to work, but my kid is 5 years old and I cannot leave him here by himself, and I don't know how to find a babysitter. There are actually apps that employers can have and pay for that will, provide a babysitter that day for that employee to be able to get to the office if they're a critical employee, and it's, value and to your business to have that person on site and have their child cared for. So, what is the cost of that babysitter versus the productivity of that employee, especially if it's a special event? So, and that, again, it comes back to this wellness, is that it's not only the physical wellness of the employee and hers or his child, but it's also that mental wellness, is that my employer understands and is helping me and taking care of me, instead of saying, you need to be here and I'm sorry that you have a sick child at home. That's too bad. You've got to figure that out, employee. That's the old school attitude, right, of how employers used to treat employees. But in today's world, we now need to be solution solvers with our employees.
Darren and Eileen, thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge. And for those who I certainly appreciate your post that we can train everyone all we want, but if the employees don't want to have those conversations, they don't trust that. I talk a lot on
Mhm.
how do we commit to our teams and our employees and give them the resources. And you look at all the employee engagement studies out there, it comes down to what you just hit on, Eileen, is how do they feel supported and how do they feel like they belong?
Mhm.
Basic human needs. And some of the most proactive ways we can be is to authentically commit to how do we support them and have them feel like they belong. If they do, they feel like they're part of the team, and no one wants to wake up and go to work and feel like they are the outcast. They are, because they may feel that in any other way. Wrap our arms around them, show them the resource that we have. And Darren, I think you so many tremendous. If anyone missed any of the resources that they shared, we will be posting it on our LinkedIn, or I'm sorry, our YouTube page, on our LinkedIn as well. Give us a week, because I think that there's some amazing golden nuggets in there. And thank you for everyone for being here to share on this important topic and make it part of our ongoing conversations out there as we lead. Have a wonderful rest of your day.